Okay, well, thank you. My name is Robert Garcia. I'm the ranking member of the Oversight Committee. Of course, I'm here with members of the Oversight Committee on Democrats that are clearly focused today on the survivors and accountability, truth, and justice. We're going to hear from some of our committee members here in just a second. I want to just give some thoughts and then answer any questions. Now, we're here in Palm Beach County because so much of this investigation brings us back to this location. We know that the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the horrible things that happened to so many women and girls, totaling 1,200, could have been stopped and halted had authorities here been listened to, had prosecutors who made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney had been listened to, had survivors been listened to. But time and time again, whether it was at the law enforcement level or whether it was at the U.S. Attorney's Office by Alex Acosta and others, that justice was denied and survivors did not receive justice. We know that that led to the additional abuse and trafficking of women and girls, including of Rosa, who you heard from today. And you heard her horrific story. And had folks listened, that would not have happened to her and to so many others. We also want to be clear that, especially after today, we want to hear and are demanding to hear from the line prosecutors and law enforcement officials that made some recommendations to prosecute additional names, to go after co-conspirators, and yet were denied those charges, and that evidence was pushed back because of decisions made by the U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta. Now, we've talked to Mr. Acosta in the past, and we have additional questions. And I think it's important for anyone that was involved in the case here in Palm Beach to know that while we have reached out to some folks to speak to us voluntarily, you will be compelled to answer questions when Democrats are in the majority. If you were involved in this case and tried to do the right thing and made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney to bring prosecutions, we encourage you to testify and to bring your information to the committee. But if you're unwilling to do so, we are going to compel that testimony because those survivors deserve to understand who and why decisions were made to not move forward with prosecutions that then led to the abuse of so many more women and girls. I'll also say that I want to reiterate to the Attorney General that we expect to see her in front of our committee in just a couple of weeks, and that we expect Republicans and James Comer, because it's his decision alone, to ensure that that testimony is recorded under oath and released to the American public. The survivors deserve nothing less, and I want to again thank them for their courage today to provide testimony under oath. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Representative Frankel, who of course hosted us here today.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Garcia and my colleagues. I've been trying to get this hearing here for many years, and I thank you so much for finally bringing folks here. Because, folks, so much of the truth lies here, hidden in Palm Beach County, and we still have yet, under oath, heard from some of the key players. Barry Krischer, who was state attorney at the time, the two prosecutors he sent in to a grand jury room to debase our survivors. We need to hear from them, and I can give you another list of associates, law enforcement, state attorney employees who have some of the answers to the big question is, why did Epstein get such a slap on the wrist? Secondly, to Courtney Wild, a bill has been filed actually numerous times to deal with her concern that the survivors were not given notice of the plea and had any opportunity to weigh into that. And I'm just going to end by saying this, because what makes this so tragic and sad is how many lives how many lives could have been spared the agony of abuse had the prosecutors in Palm Beach County acted properly, or had they not been overpowered, I should say, overpowered by Jeffrey Epstein and his team of lawyers, politicians, business people, whoever, who obviously overpowered our justice system. And with that, again, thank you. Where are you? Thank you so much for bringing us here, and all of you for your attention. I yield back.
So, we're here at ground zero for where Epstein's crimes occurred. Crimes that were moral crimes, civil crimes, criminal crimes, crimes that I would consider really against humanity, given the systemic harm caused by really what was a global enterprise of trafficking girls. Impossible for me to not think about my own 17-year-old daughter. Again, you see grown women before you who are courageous in their refusal to be silent, but they were mere girls, 14, 15, 16, 17, talented artists, dancers, aspiring teachers, lawyers, models. Their bodies were violated, their dreams devastated, their lives irreparably harmed. When you are violated in such a way as a child, it changes on a very foundational and deep level who you are forever. Your ability to love, to receive love. But it's not only an emotional toll, and certainly the cost of trauma is a high one. But there are also economic expenses, an inability to pursue a job, to keep a job, 20 years of, 30 years, 3 decades of legal fees that no one was counting on. And not only was their innocence corrupted and their bodies violated and their lives changed, their very rights were violated. The Crime Victims' Rights Act grants individuals who are victims of federal crimes specific enforceable rights, including protection from the accused, reasonable, accurate, and timely notice of public proceedings, and the right to be heard. It ensures victims are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. Well, that did not happen. Their rights were violated. And I'm working closely with survivors for a legislative fix of restorative justice. That's what brings us here today, to learn from the survivors, to identify failures, to hold predators and abusers accountable. And although I commend the survivors for their courage, I look forward to a day where survivors do not have to relive their trauma in order to compel action from their government. And finally, although this is a fight specifically for justice, accountability, and healing for our survivors who deserve so much more than sympathy, which is why I'm seeking to advance a legislative restorative justice fix to acknowledge the economic abuse and financial hardship that many of them still carry today. But this is a fight for all survivors that are victims of sexual assault and human trafficking. And so for that, to ensure that there is no erasure, I want to acknowledge the incredible work of Tarana Burke of the Me Too movement, Amber Tamblyn, and many more, and in my own district of the Massachusetts 7th, My Life, My Choice, and the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. This is a fight for all survivors.
Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Stansbury, and I am very deeply proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District and to be part of a state delegation in New Mexico that is seeking to turn the Epstein files into Epstein trials. As we stand here today, New Mexico is the first and only state to pass a state law to investigate this case. And what I think is extraordinary about today, and I want to acknowledge Congresswoman Frankel, is that this is the first congressional hearing on this case to ever be held in West Palm Beach. Think about that. The first criminal allegation against Jeffrey Epstein happened more than 25 years ago in this community. Police looked the other way. Your state Attorney General looked the other way. Our national and federal attorney generals and investigatory bodies looked the other way. The FBI had gobs of evidence that there were criminal enterprises going on here in this community that included the exploitation of children, the trafficking of children across state lines, international trafficking of children and women, and financial crimes. And over the last 2.5 decades, not a single congressional hearing has been held on this case here in this community where it all started. And so I want to say thank you to Congresswoman Frankel and to our soon-to-be chair of the Oversight Committee, because we would not be here if it were not for them and for the survivors who were brave enough to show up today and to tell their stories on camera for the world to hear. Now, I just want to say this as I close out my comments. There are lots of discussions about the failure of the system to hold Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the potentially dozens of men who exploited young girls and trafficked and participated in the sexual exploitation of survivors. But this was not an isolated incident of failures of a system. This is a system that was designed to exploit children. It was a system that protected the wealthy and powerful, and it was a system that intentionally chose not to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein under federal law, which enabled him to commit potentially hundreds of other cases of rape, abuse, grooming, and transnational sex trafficking. That is not just system failure. That is a system that was designed to enable rich and powerful people to get away with anything that they wanted. And so we're here today to make sure that the voices of survivors, that the stories of survivors are heard not just in this community, but across the world, and to make sure that we take on that system directly. To say we are not going to stand for this one more moment, and to end the injustices that have allowed this to happen in this community and communities all across the country. And so we demand accountability. We demand action. We demand that Pam Bondi show up for her deposition. We demand that Donald Trump release the Epstein files. We demand that Todd Blanche actually prosecute these crimes, and we demand accountability for every single perpetrator that is still out there. We are coming for you.
I'm Emily Randall. I represent Washington State's 6th District, and I have been moved over and over and over by the stories of such brave women who are forced by a system of power to relive their trauma over and over and over in pursuit of justice. And what I hear from my neighbors, and I know that my colleagues hear from the American people across the country, is that this case isn't only about survivors of Epstein's trafficking and sexual crimes, but it is about survivors everywhere who finally feel a little bit of hope that their stories will be listened to and that they will be able to imagine a future in which there is justice. But we're not there yet, because we still are experiencing a Department of Justice that is engaging in a massive cover-up. 2.5 million documents still unreleased in this Epstein investigation. And yet, the release over and over and over again, thousands of times, of the names and personally identifying information of survivors. There's nothing else to call that but witness intimidation, because it cannot be accidental, the number of times that co-conspirators and powerful men have their names redacted in the files and survivors' names are unredacted. No matter how many times they have asked for that privacy and protection, no matter how many women testified under the understanding that they would be identified as Jane Doe, we are seeing information about survivors who have already been traumatized over and over and over again be released as part of this cover-up and part of this intimidation strategy. We are going to continue to fight so that those who are actually culpable, the dozens, hundreds of people who are actually culpable, have their day in the sunlight, that we record their testimony, that we investigate this to the full extent, and we are committed every day to working alongside the survivors to ensure that they are protected to the best of our abilities. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yasmin Ansari, Congresswoman from Arizona's 3rd District. I was a child just a few years younger than many of the women who testified today when Jeffrey Epstein was carrying out his heinous crimes right here in West Palm Beach. These women were girls at the time, over 1,000 girls. Girls who should have been protected, but girls who were failed by adults, by institutions, and by their government. And what happened here in West Palm Beach and across the country and across the world was not simply just about the evil of one man. It was a systemic failure that was shaped by inequality, by influence, and by impunity. All of this has been exacerbated by the most corrupt administration in American history, carrying out the most egregious cover-up in American history. And this systemic failure requires systemic solutions. In the minority, oversight Democrats, led by Ranking Member Garcia, have forced everything that has gotten us to this point today. We would not be here if it were not for Democrats on the Oversight Committee pushing every subpoena, pushing for these depositions, pushing for these transcribed interviews, pushing for Pam Bondi to come before the Oversight Committee. This has been an egregious cover-up by the Trump administration, but also a complete abdication of responsibility by Republicans on the Oversight Committee, barring a few, and by Republican Chairman James Comer. And we will continue, whether now or when we are in the majority, to make sure that every single person who enabled, who perpetrated, or who covered up these heinous crimes will be held accountable. And we know from what we heard from the women today, and we've known this, it's in the files, that there are rich and powerful men out there right now continuing to live their lives without any consequences. And we assure you that day will end.
Good afternoon. I'm James Walkinshaw from Virginia's 11th District. We're here today in Palm Beach County, ground zero, the center, the place where Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's massive child sex trafficking ring started. We're just miles from Mar-a-Lago, the place where the close friendship between Epstein and Donald Trump grew, where Virginia Giuffre was trafficked and later raped by Jeffrey Epstein. And we heard today powerful stories from survivors, including Rosa from Uzbekistan, who was recruited and held hostage by the visa that Epstein controlled. Powerful stories. And I hope the world was watching. I specifically hope that Alex Acosta was watching, because we learned today from Rosa that she was raped time after time after time by Jeffrey Epstein while he was serving the sweetheart deal sentence that Alex Acosta gave him. While he was on unsupervised, very unsupervised release, he was continuing to commit the very crimes that women like Maria Farmer and others brought to the attention of the FBI decades ago. I hope another person was watching today. I hope Pam Bondi was watching. And I hope she saw the courage of the survivors here today who told their stories, in most cases, again, in front of all the cameras, with all of the bright lights for the world to see. And I hope Pam Bondi will feel some shame for the fact that she has tried time after time after time to avoid public accountability. She wants to answer questions behind closed doors, in private, where the world can't see it, with no video. Well, Pam Bondi, that is not good enough. That is not good enough. You need to show 1 ounce of the courage that the women here today showed. They deserve your public testimony on video. The American people deserve it too. I'll go back to the ranking member.
Thank you. We're going to open up for a couple of questions. Before I do, I want to say a couple important things as we close. Number one, I hope today reminds the public that this investigation is not a hoax and that it's not over, and that unlike Todd Blanche, the acting AG, who just a week ago said that the DOJ was moving on from the Epstein investigation, we understand that it is alive and well and moving forward, and we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And the second thing is, for this community, it's important for the folks of Palm Beach County, Palm Beach, West Palm Beach to understand and to know that there's a lot of folks that worked for law enforcement, that were lawyers involved in this case, that were investigators, or that have heard stories or know information or evidence that we want to access. So I encourage anyone from the Palm Beach community that may have information about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, the crimes, or the cover-ups that happened, to please contact the Oversight Committee. We have a protected system, a whistleblower system, that we encourage you to please access if you have information that could help us in our investigation. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Your last interview now as the committee is scheduled for July 15th. Do you expect that there will be more before the election? How many and who, by name if you can, do each of you most want to hear from as your investigation continues?
Look, we're working right now through a list of additional subpoenas that we want to get through. Some we're communicating directly with the majority on, so we're waiting to see if they move on those or not. But I think it's safe to say that we're interested in speaking to anyone that was involved, particularly prosecutors that were involved in making recommendations about the sweetheart deal, what happened here in Palm Beach, and more broadly in some of the other cases that were brought forward to the government. That's one piece of folks we want to speak to. We also have additional questions for other folks that we believe were involved in assisting Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Some of those you and I discussed earlier, but we're not at this moment ready to release additional names.
If you win back the House in November, will you bring back the people that were already called in to testify since they testified behind closed doors? There were no cameras, there's no transparency. Will you bring the survivors back so that they can actually be reported into the Congressional Library and on the record? And who else do you plan to call? And will you call anyone from your own party?
So let me add, one is obviously as it relates to survivors, we're never going to force a survivor to be compelled to speak in front of the committee, but any survivor that wants to speak and have the opportunity, absolutely. And we definitely have additional questions for folks that we've talked to. I'll take Alex Acosta as a very good example. We'll definitely have additional questions. As far as members from our party, we have been nonpartisan in our approach. We don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We'll talk to you. And I think we said earlier that we have additional questions. I want to understand why Merrick Garland in the former Justice Department under the Biden administration did little to nothing to bring justice for the survivors or have additional prosecutions. And so Merrick Garland, for me, is at the top of that list of folks that we need to speak to and ask questions of. And I think there are a variety of other folks. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that. There's a variety of other folks that we want to speak with. Yes.
Yes, Representative Garcia, Dave Bowman, WPTV. It was hailed as a victory when the bill passed the House where the files were going to be released. that the names of the survivors came out. What do you do moving forward to try to prevent that? And to get names of the perpetrators released when your own survivors today said they don't have a lot of confidence in that?
Yeah, I mean, I put the blame squarely on former Attorney General Pam Bondi for that. She has had a direct hand in this cover-up from the beginning. Not only did they move slowly, but they were sloppy. We heard from survivors, as you mentioned, that their lives have been destroyed while names of men and co-conspirators who committed the crimes were redacted. So I think that there needs to be that's why we need to hear from Pam Bondi at the end of this month under oath on camera in front of the American people, because she is to blame for this, and there should be, I believe, accountability for her and for what she did here. She has ruined lives. I mean, we heard such devastating stories today about people's children hearing these stories for the first time, women whose details of their sexual assault and abuse was revealed because of the botching of this files. The law was very clear that any personally identifiable information as it pertains to survivors should have been redacted. This is not an accident. The Department of Justice chose to do this because they want to silence people. They want this to go away. Donald Trump has made that abundantly clear. He's directed his staff to make sure that happens, and I believe that the reason these mistakes were made was, again, not an accident and at the direction of Pam Bondi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and moreover, I would just say that what this proves, the fact that none of our Republican colleagues are here today. For Democrats, this is not a midterm campaign strategy. This is not about political gamesmanship or upsmanship, but clearly for them, fighting for the naming the Epstein files in their campaigning. The Epstein files, by the way, are real people. These are real people's lives, right? That was just purely political for them. As proven by their obstruction and by their defiance and their unwillingness to comply with legally binding subpoenas. And then finally, I would just say something that really just stayed with me today. There have been so many instances of insult to injury. Not only were vile acts committed by this vermin in their predator, pedophile Ponzi scheme that is a lifetime sentence for these survivors. This trauma is showing up and manifesting in their lives in so many ways. But it is insult to injury that there was an institutional betrayal by law enforcement, by the Department of Justice, and now today by House Republicans. And their rights were not honored in the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And the fact, as Congresswoman Randall speaks to, that their names have been unredacted. That was some of the most devastating testimony here today. It is insult to injury. And in the words of Virginia Giuffre, we need to know who the monsters are. We need to follow every single road. We don't care if they're Democrat, Republican, independent, what state they live in, what their job is, if they're a politician, if they're a president, or if even they are a prince. We will follow all roads because this is not political for us. This is deeply personal. This is about these survivors and their families. And every monster, in the words of Virginia Giuffre, needs to be named and shamed because they could still be out there committing these evil, vile acts.
Okay, last question.
Yeah, I just want to know if former state attorney, Mr. Fisher, if he's been invited to testify, and what could his testimony reveal to the public?
What I can say is that we have invited some former Florida officials to testify voluntarily. That has yet to happen, and so we are prepared to compel testimony in the future. That's something that we're looking at right now. Thank you very much.